Sigrídur Hagalín Björnsdóttir Szent szó című kötetét mutatja be Veress Dávid, a szerzővel Veress Dávid fog beszélgetni, és közreműködik Lengyel Tamás, jó szórakozásként.
Yes, hello. So good to see you.
Well, hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And good evening, Sigríður. It's so good to have you here again. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me
tonight. To start off, well, your first book, Okay, the Island. I don't know how many of you haven't read the book, or, you know, in one sentence, Iceland is lost all contact with the rest of the world overnight. And the question is, what happens after that? And so this book haunted me quite a lot last year with all the restrictions and closures and you know what. Did it you too?
Yes, it did in a way. It was for a while after COVID broke out and after everything started closing down, people sometimes came up to me in the supermarket and they back home in Iceland and they asked me, okay, so what are you buying? You know, what are you putting in your basket? And I'm going to check, I'm going to do the same as you. Or they asked me, how could you do this to us? Or something like that. But it was nice, mostly. I think they were joking, but it was. But it was a little, yeah, it was a little eerie, I guess.
And you just talk about tourism, it stopped completely. Is it added to that eerie feeling, or is that the normal thing to have so much more tourists than Icelanders on the island?
Yeah, very fortunately, nothing as bad happened to the tourists, you know, as it did in the island. But
what happened to those people?
in the book, well, they met a sorry fate. I hope that the tourists who were planning to come to Iceland, they're all very healthy and doing fine today. But yeah, it was a little strange to find this happening, and but in a way, it's always haunted Icelanders. The fear of isolation, the fear of, because we live on a rock in the middle of the ocean, so we're always a little scared of being cut off from the rest of the world. So this COVID happening, it sort of brought us back a few decades, I guess, and we went back to when the tourists left. We had all the country for ourselves, and we went traveling and visiting, you know, all those sightseeing sites, all the tourist sites, and just enjoying them for ourselves. But we were also a little sad because in Iceland people basically more or less look the same, and everybody is basically your aunt when you live in Iceland. So just getting them back now and having, you know, people of all colours and all shapes, all nationalities come to the country, it's really, really wonderful to be back.
Yes, and this new book, well, a difficult one. If you'd have to put a label on it, what would that be? Because for me, it's kind of a family saga injected with thriller.
I think you caught it quite accurately. It's originally I wanted to write. Well, it's basically it started with a news story I was doing because I'm a journalist back in Iceland, and many years ago I interviewed an American lady. She's called Wolf. Naomi Wolf. No, not Naomi Wolf. Her name is Angelica Wolf, I think. She's a neurosurgeon. She studies the human brain. She knows all about the human brain and the connections within within the brain. And she was talking to Icelandic teachers about the way we learn to read and how we sort of have to reprogram our minds to be able to read texts, because we don't have a station in our brain to read with, so we have to create it. When we start reading as children, we have to form a special place in a special connection in the brain so we are able to read. And I found this absolutely fascinating, the fact that we are animals who are not created to read, but yet we read, we make the decision to read, and we change our brains, and we change our children's brains in order to read. So this started off as a story about reading and how reading and texts change our minds as individuals and also as societies. But then quickly it turned into a family saga, as you say, and somehow it turned into, a thriller, because it's about a search, because it's a brother who goes searching for his missing sister. But while he's looking for her, he ends up finding himself, basically. So in a way, it may look like a thriller because it's about somebody going missing, and usually when somebody goes missing in books, it's because they're dead. But it's not that kind of a thriller, you could say. It's a family saga thriller. I think you had it right.
And that's a very interesting topic for a book. You know, the dilemma in the novel is to write or not to write, to read or not to read. And you wrote, so you took your side, I think, in that dilemma. But I mean, what's wrong with writing or reading, for that matter? After all, we're in the book festival promoting the book, and there are probably reading people here who like to do that.
Yeah, and that was also because I am a text person. I'm a book person, and I love texts, and I love reading, and I love writing. And I found it very interesting to turn to the other side and ask, what's bad about reading? Is there a case against reading? How would the world look if we hadn't started to read? If the letters and the alphabet had never taken over our brains, how would we react? And I sort of thought my way through this while I was writing the book. And I mean, in the end, it's not a case against reading or writing. It's more, I think it's a thought experiment about the impact of texts and the impact of reading on our brains. And it's also because I wanted to write about people who are not able to read, people who suffer from dyslexia, who really have to struggle and really have to fight to be able not only to read but also to participate in society, because our society is almost entirely constructed around texts, and if you're not able to process those texts, you're not able to access, you're not able to participate. You can't really, if you can't go to school, if you can't study, you can't really do anything. So that was, I wanted to write a book about these people who stand outside this circle that we all belong to, and that was Einar, the brother in the story.
And then he has a sister who goes missing, but he is quite the other side of the coin, hyperlexia with all that.
Yes, he is. I was interested to find out that there actually is a condition called hyperlexia. There's a dyslexia if you can't really process text, but then there's hyperlexia if you are too attached to the text. You sort of live within the text and you can't really have a life outside of it. And I found that quite, and it actually does exist. There are people who are like that. And I found that also interesting to study, the opposite of dyslexia, because that's a handicap as well. you have to be good at both things. You can't really, you know, the book isn't enough. You have to have the life outside of it as well. So that was also what I wanted to write about in this book.
Yeah, so raising awareness is a thing of yours. In your first book, you did it as well. You pointed at social, psychological, and cultural issues that needs to be dealt with, but gently. So, do you think literature can make a change? Does it have the power to influence people?
I think literature is the most important thing in the world, and I think it's basically we are a part of it. We are all a part of literature, and literature is such a it's such an integral part of our culture and civilization that we can't really separate ourselves from it. But we sort of have to decide which literature we participate in. And I think as a journalist, I find that as well, that we're always telling stories. Every single thing that happens in history, everything we write about, every news story, every conversation we have is a story. And you have the power over it. You have the power to turn it into an interesting story, or a boring story, or a sad story, or a tragedy, or a fantasy, or something like that. And literature is one way or another. It's whether it's written down or not. It's very much it's the most important thing in the world.
But you would like to influence people, no? To be more, to accept people more with difficulties, or you don't have any agenda, hidden agenda?
I try not to have an agenda, but of course, I mean, we are not impartial. Nobody is impartial. Impartiality is impossible. You can strive towards it. You can strive towards towards not taking a side in things you're dealing with, but I think it always comes through one way or another. It's difficult for me as a journalist to be impartial. It's absolutely impossible for me as a novelist to be impartial. So yes, of course, I hope, if there's anything, I hope that my books, they raise awareness about, they make people think, at least, and they make people think about different things and difficult things to think about. And I like to pose difficult questions to people.
And one problem is, or one issue is, the station of single moms.
Yeah.
Yes, because, so in the core of the novel there is this sibling couple, if you can say that, the brother and sister, and their mothers are different. They share a daddy, but the mothers are different. They were born half a year apart or so. Yes, and these moms decide to move in together without a daddy. So that's interesting, and I think that the book has a subtle feministic undertone where these strong, independent women can manage on their own. We don't need anyone. Am I?
I think the book has a very strong feminist undertone, because it's not only about single mothers living together, it's also about the father figure that doesn't really work anymore, and that's something this is the situation. So the situation in the Western world now is that the father figure is very much being taken down, and there are lots of young men and boys who don't really know where to look for an ideal, for somebody who they can use as a father figure, as a model. And that's one of the problems that Einar runs into. He's not only dyslexic, his father really doesn't work for him. He turns out to be not a father at all, but something else. So he needs to find a different way to be a man and a different way to be masculine. And the story about the single mothers is it's actually very funny. It's based on a misunderstanding. Because in Iceland we have a lot of single mothers and a lot of single fathers, and I think most children in Iceland are born out of wedlock, because it doesn't really matter, you know, if the parents are married or not. We're sort of liberal that way. And there were 2 kids in my school when I was a teenager, and they were siblings, but they had different mothers. And well, I always thought they were siblings and they had different mothers, and the mothers had moved in together and raised them without the father. And I just, you know, for many years I thought that. And, you know, 10 or 15 years later I found out that this was not the case. They weren't even related at all. You know, it was just a big misunderstanding, and something I've been, you know, carrying around in my head for so many years. And it was just nonsense, complete nonsense. I don't know why my mind made that story, but I decided it was an interesting misunderstanding, so I decided to use it in a story anyway. So that's how that relationship comes about. But then afterwards, after I wrote the story and it came out in Iceland, I was contacted by quite a few people who were raised in that exact situation. And they said, oh, well, my mother, she, you know, raised me and my sister, you know, we had the same dad and we had the same situation. And so it turned out to be, this misunderstanding turned out to be not a misunderstanding at all, you know, so it went a complete turn, you know, around. So I think, you know, sometimes books know more than the people who write them.
And the father figure, the disappearance of the father figure, should we make a new one, or is that a bad thing to, you know, down with the patriarchy?
I think good fathers have always existed, you know, and the good father is very much alive and well, and he has always been there, you know. I have a marvelous dad, you know, and my husband is a marvelous dad, and there are lots of lovely dads out there. But I think this masculine ideal about, you know, this action hero, you know, macho man who's sort of, you know, he's very dominating and you know, he has lots of women and he doesn't really take care of his children, you know. It's I think we're sort of we're in rebellion against that kind of a father figure, and this has very much been the case in at least many parts of the world. It's this distant, very, you know, aggressive, masculine type of a father, and I think a lot of young men are dealing with that now, that they have to find different ways of being masculine and being fathers for the children and being lovers and husbands, you know, without, outside of that normalized cage they were basically stuck in for such a long time.
It's not easy. Do you have an advice for these young men?
I think it's always very good if you learn how to cook meatballs. You know, you can start there, and if you learn how to cook meatballs, you can always, you know, you can't go wrong with those.
Alrighty. You use quite a lot of cultural references in your books. Okay, let me name a few. Farewell to Arms, Peter Greenaway, The Seventh Seal, Hans Wagner Czer, Tracy Emin, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and the list goes on. List goes on. Do you expect the reader to know every one of them, or would you like the reader to know them? Or something completely different?
I think you don't have to know them. You can just pass them by in the text if you want to. It doesn't really, you know, you get the general idea. You don't have to know exactly who this is. If you're interested in knowing about them, I mean, you can always Google. And if you do, I would be delighted, you know, because these are cultural references that I really like. And I wouldn't put them in the book if it didn't mean a lot to me. So in that way, it's it's your pick. I mean, you're the reader. You just do what you like.
Back to the question, women's literature. I forgot to ask your opinion about women's literature. What do you think about women's literature? Is there such a thing as women's literature?
Is there any other thing? we are writers and we are readers and we are I mean in most books, in most literature there are women, you know. They're written about, they write themselves, I think women are the biggest group of readers anywhere in the world, at least anywhere where I know. I think women have a different way of writing about many things, or some women have different ways of writing about many things than many men. I know men who write better about women than most women do, you know. I think it's very much a crossover. I think women have to write, I think men have to write. I don't think there's any absolute truth. I don't think your sex limits what you write or what you read. And I think generally that we need a more diverse sphere of writers. We need, you know, writers from different parts of the world, from all sexualities or sexual orientations, and we need, we just, as I think most, if we think about literature as a whole and like a global whole, we all need to participate. We need, you know, input from everybody for it to make sense. Don't you agree?
I do completely. Just the label, women's literature. Why can't we just have? You know, I'm a feminist, so why can't we just have literature?
Yeah, I think some women write women's literature. I think, yeah, I know some women.
Tolstoy did as well.
Yeah. Some men write men's literature, you know, and it's by men, about men, and it's mostly aimed towards men. And I think it's safe to say that it's male literature. Some women, they're focusing very much on the female experience and they're aiming towards women and you know, talking about the situation of being a woman. And I think that's fine. I think we need all that.
But would you place this book in a women's literature category?
No, I don't think so. Not especially. It's I don't think of myself as that kind of a writer. But but if anybody places me in that category, I won't be offended. You know, I'm fine with that. You know, whatever suits you.
And Edda, the girl who goes missing, is a very famous social media celebrity in one part of her life. Yes, and you are one of the most renowned TV personalities in Iceland.
Well, that's completely different.
And but yes, okay, well, one for one. The other thing is that you don't mention TV, I think, at all in the book, but you do mention Facebook and the rest of social media. So is the telly dead, or?
No, I don't think it's dead. But I'm very much a child of the 20th century, and I don't really. I'm very focused on the book, on the text, on television, on radio, on this is my world, and I know I'm a little, you know, backwards in that, you know. So part of this was, you know, part of writing this book was trying to get into that world and understanding it better. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, but I'm mostly just, you know, sort of, you know, moping around and you know, watching what others are doing there. But I'm not really active there. But I'm fascinated by people who, especially young people who are using it as this means of expression. They're making money out of it and they're posting about their experiences and about their... and I think if I had written this book now, after the Me Too wave and everything, I would have probably placed Edda in a little different category. because the world she is writing about there, or where she's sort of moving in the social media is very superficial. And I think I wrote a little, about it as something superficial and she's mostly just, doing her hair and changing the curtains or buying towels or something. So I'm not writing very respectfully about it. But since I wrote this book, I met so many young women who are using it to empower themselves and to tell their stories and to fight the good fight, if you might say so. And they're making, themselves heard in a way, in a more individual way than I ever could have done, when I was in my 20s. And you have to admire that, and it can turn both ways. It can either be it can be the end of civilization if you're very, very pessimistic, but it's also, it's also a new beginning, and it's a new form of communication and self-promotion and activism, which I find absolutely fascinating, very, very frightening, but also absolutely fascinating.
And is there a relation between reading less and being more on social media platforms? Because
I'm not sure.
No.
I'm not sure. Absolutely not. And I think maybe it's making us read differently. I think it's sort of pushing us towards. I think it's because it's turning us into maybe it's fragmenting us more. Like everything we do is becoming more fragmented. So it's more like you turn to the poem. If you're a poem person and you identify as a poetry person, you turn to the poem and you write about it in social media or something like that. I don't think we will ever stop reading books. I believe in the book. I'm quite optimistic on behalf of the book, but we are maybe sort of using it in a different way than we used to, if you understand me.
Yeah. And this book I think has a little social media taste, and it's very 21st century, because you use short chapters, there are emails, there are different perspectives, it takes some time to figure out the structure itself, which makes the text very vivid, and the story to be more engaging, or if you need that. So was that something you had in mind when you wrote that?
No, not really, but I'm very at ease with shorter prose, and I think I normally write shorter chapters because I'm so used to working with news stories, and they can only be like tops 4 minutes or something like that. So it's you get into the habit of formulating the thought into a very concise text. I might try to go on, page after page after page after page, but I find it very, you could make, some people have described this book as a collection of small stories, of short stories, and you might think of it as something like that, or a collection of connected short stories. But I think it's a novel. And I think it's basically the way I think is fragmented like that, like social media, if you call it like. I'm still a child of the 20th century, but it's an interesting thought. But I was fascinated by the birth of the internet when I was writing this book, and I actually made a lot of research into it. And I had written these whole chapters about the internet and how it evolved, and who came up with the idea for this and that, and how it spread around the world. And my editor was like, "No, Sigga, you have to, nobody's interested in this. You have to cut it out." And I'm thankful, for that. But it's a fascinating history. So if you're interested, you should definitely look at that. It's really worth reading.
there is a Hungarian man in the novel. You know that? Yes. An interesting one at that. Could you tell a bit about him?
Well, I've always been fascinated by Hungary. It's since I was a little kid, and I was playing the violin, and I had this very, very romantic image about Hungary, and you know, I thought you were all, you know, walking around playing the violin and you know, dancing or something, you know. I thought it was, you know, and I think it was. He's made up of some linguists, some famous linguists. You know, I just sort of pulled the threads together and turned him into one. None of them were Hungarian, so I have no idea why I turned him into Hungarian. It's just my gift to Hungary, you know, turning this strange linguist into Hungarian.
Yes, let's see. Yeah, I think you have to read now for us a bit in your beautiful Icelandic language. Do you have the part?
Yeah, I think so. I think I have. I'm not really up to reading it in Hungarian, I'm afraid. I would do my best, though. Yeah, I think I have. Should I just sit here?
You don't have that from? Okay, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think it's like this. Okay. Dagur 2. Einar situr í nokkrar mínútur inn í patrólnum eftir hann drepur á honum fyrir utan hús Eddu og Ragnars. Hann skrúfar niður bílrúðuna, vefur sér sígarettu, reykir hana og virðir húsið fyrir sér. Hvítan kassa með stórum gluggum, hekkið klift eftir hallamáli, fyrir utan stendur nýlegur Audi Quattro. Hann veit ekki einu sinni almennilega við hvað systir hans og mágur vinna, en veltan hjá þeim virðist í lagi. Hann drepur í sígarettunni, stingur stubbnum í Pepsi-dós, stígur út úr jeppanum og reynir að líta út fyrir að eiga gilt erindi í þennan snyrtilega heim, þrátt fyrir úfið, skeggið og lópapeysuna. Það ekki einu sinni skráagat á útidyrahurðinni heldur einhver nemi. Einar brosir eins meinleysislega og hann getur í myndavélina fyrir ofan dyrabjöllum. Það ósköp að sjá Ragnar. Hann gráleitur í framan og rauðeygður, virðist hafa horast enn meira á þessum 1,5 sólarhring frá því að konan hans hvarf. Hann tekur varla kveðju Einars, hverfur aftur inn í húsið. Einar eltir hann með hálfum huga, sparkar gönguskónum af sér í forstofunni. Barnið grætur einhvers staðar í húsinu. Stílhrænt heimilið þegar farið að láta undan óreiðinu, pítsukassi á stofugólfinu og óhreinar bleiur á eldhúsborðinu. Einar ákveður að fara út með ruslið. Ragnar virðist ekki taka eftir því þegar hann kemur fram með barnið á öxlinni. Einar kjáir framan í drenginn, ætlar að snerta hann en hættir við, dregur hramminn til baka. Júlía segir að þú ætlar að fara að leita að henni, segir Ragnar dauflega. Hún náttúrulega búin að skipuleggja þetta allt. Einari finnst hann geta alveg sýnt örlítið þakklæti eða áhuga á þessum skrýtna leiðangri sem Júlía hefur troðið upp á hann, en hann hefur heldur aldrei áttað sig á Ragnari, aldrei náð neinu sambandi við hann, svona hressan og snyrtilegan, alltaf að flýta sér eitthvað til að græða pening.
And I believe we're going to hear another part of the book in lengyel. Tamás is.
Én olvasáskor nem biztos, hogy ilyen plastikus lesz. A borbély üzlet az utca szemközti oldalán a szállodával szemben működik. A fodrász megkérdezi Einárt, hogy biztosan az egészet lenyírja el, mire Einár bólogat. Behúnyt szemmel figyeli, ahogy fogyatkozik a szakálla, és arra úcsúdik fel, hogy kisfiús, tüsi frizurája lett. A szakálla helyén pedig sápadt az álla, teljesen felismerhetetlen. Együtt nevetnek a tükörben látható változáson. Einár tojást és békent rendel az utcában lévő reggelizőhelyen, ahol az asztalok és a székek padlóhoz vannak rögzítve. A jobb napokat látott bár neoncsövei vadul villálnak. A pincérlány Einárral egyidős, de világoskép munkaköpenyében és bőrszínű harisnyanadrágjában, mintha egy másik évszázadból lépett volna elő. Egyedül van, kedveském? Kérdezi, miközben kávét tölt Einár csészéjével. Amerikai palacsintát vagy bundás kenyeret kér hozzá. Einar nem felel, majd rámosolyog a platinaszőke és vörösen kirúzsozott nőre, aki kedvesen visszamosolyog rá. Aztán Einar felhívja Júliát, és röviden beszámol neki az előző napi eseményekről. Hát, nem tudom, válaszolja, és hörpint egyet a híg kávéból. 2 napja keresem, de nem találtam semmit. Egyetlen kurva nyomot sem. Elég vad ötlet volt a részedről, nem? Ugyan már, felel Júlia. Használd a kizárásos módszert. A követséget és a rendőrséget már ki is zártad. Ez már valami. Mi a helyzet otthon? A rendőrség a közösségi médiát vizsgálja, a hatalmas munka. Edda az elmúlt években csak ott élt és mozgott. Meg a devizaszámlát is átnézik. Úgy tűnik, hogy 5 évvel ezelőtt ő maga nyitotta a cég nevére. Ami elég különös, mivel akkoriban még javában érvényben voltak a devizakorlátozások, az átlag emberek nem járkáltak dollárral teli zsebekkel. Azóta évente érkeztek különböző összegek bankszámlákról a világ minden tájáról. Dániából, az USA-ból, még a Kajmán-szigetekről is. És Edda eltűnéséig majdnem $100,000 gyűjt össze a számlán. A jelek szerint senki sem tudja, kitől és miért kapta azt a pénzt. Ragnárnak sincs fogalma róla. Ő hogy van? Egész jól feleli Júlia. Az anyja oda költözött, hogy vigyázzon a gyerekre. Ragnárnak rengeteg a dolga a vállalkozásával, meg persze a média is rengetegszer keresi. Gyanítom, hogy ezt most arra is kihasználja, hogy reklámot csináljon magának. Nem állj, Júlia, bassza meg. Bukik ki Einárból. Ragnár nem olyan. Vagy igen? Hallja, hogy Júlia a vonal túlsó végén rágyújt egy cigarettára, letüdőzi, majd kifújja a füstöt. Elképzeli, ahogy a nő behunja a félszemét. Remélem nem, feleli Júlia. De sosem értettem náluk, hol húzódik a magánélet és a marketing határa. Einar habozik. Szerinted elképzelhető, szólal meg végül, hogy Edda újra elkezdett olvasni? Hogy azért jött ide? Júlia beszívja a füstöt, elgondolkodik. Biztos vagy benne, hogy valaha is abba hagyta? Kérdezi aztán. Azt hittem, teljesen felfüggesztette, amikor megbetegedett, feleli Einar. Elképesztően megváltozott, mire Reykjavikba költöztem. A szánalmas autista lány buli királynővé vált, a World Class edzőterem legnépszerűbb csajává. Nem ismertem rá. Feleli Júlia. A Fédroszról szóló könyv az, amit a pincében találtam, 6 éve jelent meg. Tehát azóta kellett elolvasnia és bejelölnie azt a fejezetet. Fédrosz, csap Einar a homlokára. A picsába, Júlia, tiszta hülye vagyok. Később felhívlak. Letesz $20 az asztalra és bocsánatot kér a pincérlánytól, amikor az kihozza a reggelit. Elfelejtett valamit, máshol kellene lennie. Aztán futásnak ered a könyvtár felé, olyan gyorsan, ahogy csak a hőség és a forgalom engedi. A recepciós ugyanott ül, de rá sem hederít Einárra, aki kettesével szedi a lépcsőfokokat, zihálva rohan be az olvasóterembe, és megpillantja Angelt, aki éppen egy rakás könyvet tol egy kocsin, és a polcokra pakolja őket. Bocsánat, mondja fújtatva és lihegve. Eszembe jutott egy könyv, ami talán hasznos lehet, a címe Fédrosz, Platón írta. Angel nagy szemeket mereszt rá. Einar visszabámul, aztán észbe kap. Ne haragudjon, a nevem Einar. Tegnap segített nekem, emlékszik? A nővéremet keresem, csak ma reggel fodrásznál jártam. Mindenit felé Angel meglepetten. Köszöntöm a civilizált világban. Milyen jóképű a sok haj és szőr nélkül. Azzal a pulthoz lép, hogy a katalógusban megkeresse a könyvet. Ott van a terem másik végében. Platón dialógusai ott állnak hosszú sorokban, Einar előveszi a Fédrosz régi és új kiadásait, belelapoz a könyvekbe, pedig nem tudja, mit keres. Foglaljon helyet, mondja Angel. Olvassa el. A könyvekkel csak akkor megyünk valamire, ha elolvassuk őket. Einar kiválaszt néhány példányt, egy díszes egyetemi kiadást, egy olcsó puha fedeles kiadást és egy kisebb kötetet szép vörös bőrkötésben, amelynek címe mély aranyozott betűkkel áll a gerincén. Szótárt vesz elő. Leül az egyik hosszú asztalhoz, egymás után üti fel a könyveket és olvasni kezd. Lassan és akadozva, mint mindig. A könyvben 2 férfi, Szókratész és ez a Fédrosz beszélget. A szöveg nehezen érthető angolsággal íródott. A mű legnagyobb része lábjegyzetekből áll, magyarázatokkal és görög nyelvű hivatkozásokkal. Einar lapozgatja szövegen, de végül feladja. Félreteszi az utolsó könyvet is, és az arcát a tenyerébe temeti. Egy kéz érinti meg a vállát, felpillant és Ángelt veszi észre, akinek a por világos kék kört vont a szeme köré. Segítségre van szüksége? Kérdezi halkan, mire Einar bólint. Nem olvasok valami jól, felé. Ez túl bonyolult. Amire bólint. Elveszi az egyik könyvet az asztalról, mint Einárnak, hogy kövesse, odasúg valamit a könyvtárosnak, és Einárt egy folyosóra vezeti, egy ablaktalan zugba, ami valamiféle műhely. Leül egy ragasztótubusokkal, kartonlapokkal, késekkel és ragasztótekercsekkel teli íróasztalhoz, és jelzi Einárnak, hogy foglaljon helyet vele szemben. Ez a mi könyvkórházunk, magyarázza, és a földön lévő dobozokra mutat, amelyekben kupacokban állnak a megviselt könyvek. Igazi restaurálással nem foglalkozunk, de kisebb javításokat el tudunk végezni, mondja kedvesen. Tudok olvasni, mentegetőzik Einar, de régi filozófiai írásokat angolul nem szoktam. És nagyon hálás lennék, ha tudna segíteni abban, hogy megtaláljam, amit keresek. Önkéntes vagyok, feleli Ángel. Az a dolgom, hogy segítsek. Einar elmondja, mit keres, a nő pedig addig lapozgat, amíg meg nem találja. Egy kicsit bonyolult, mondja, és megigazítja a szemüvegét. Készen áll?
Magyar Tamás, Sigríður Hagalín Björnsdóttir, és ezt a csodálatosan megírt könyvet tényleg csodálatosan